As the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, progresses, the Department of Health and Human Services is taking away the religious freedom that all Americans are guaranteed by the First Amendment by requiring that all employers, regardless of religious conscience, provide all forms of contraception to their employees and even to minors without the knowledge of their parents. In response to this assault on the Constitution, Catholic leaders are stepping up and are searching for what can be done within the bounds of the law to deliver quality health care that follows the ethical and religious directives for Catholic health care services. The Make Straight the Pathway Conference was held in Houston, Texas in March of 2013 on the campus of the University of St. Thomas to shed light on the critical problem of providing quality health care and protecting everyone's religious freedoms.
Morning, good to be with y'all. I thank you for that introduction, Tim. So I always enjoy driving to Houston, even though it, as you might expect, it always takes a little trouble to get out of Austin. But I'm always glad when that fog, so to speak, clears. There's a lot of things that you could describe as the fog coming out of Austin. But I grew up here in Houston and just love coming back to H-Town, as some of my younger friends call it. But and also, as a Catholic myself, I'm honored to be here at such a fine university and amongst such fine people and such fine leaders. And so thank you for having me and giving me an opportunity to speak on such an important issue, timely issue. When I was a law student at the University of Houston, we talked about these issues of religious liberty. As a matter of fact, I was leading a pro-life group at the university at the time, and we were in a contentious battle fighting for our religious liberty rights and free speech rights to make sure that our voice could be heard on specific pro-life issues. And so, but when you think about a lot of the court cases and issues, a lot of times people think they come from other parts of the country, and we think of Texas as very strong on issues of religious liberty and values, and by and large, that's true. But I think that oftentimes we can see things happening in our own backyard that cause us great concern. And so I've got a handout that's going around that I'm going to make reference to, and if I didn't get enough copies for everyone, I'll make sure that you get one, or you can just contact us through our website at txvalues.org. I don't know if it's not working, the computer over here. We'll get that displayed in just a minute, but it is on one of the handouts, my contact information. So, in the state of Texas, as I was saying, we're very proud of the rights that we have. We're very proud of our religious liberty rights. We're proud of our values. And there's a lot of tug of war going on right now in some ways with Washington and Texas and other states. And so, we think about this issue and think about how do we push back against Washington, or some of us do, and how do we deal with some of these federal mandates and so on. And but there are things happening in our own state that I think cause us concern, and there are also opportunities at the state level. The work that I do and that I'm involved in as an attorney and a policy analyst and as an advocate, I do all kinds of different things on the issues of religious liberty, marriage and family, and life. We work on these issues, I do in my organization, at a state level. We'll sometimes interact with folks at the federal level, but most of our focus is what's happening in the state of Texas, what's happening outside of the state of Texas that is impacting folks within the state of Texas. Being fifth generation myself, that suits me just fine to be looking after our Lone Star State. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some things that have happened on the issues of religious liberty, but how they tie back to what's happening at the state level and also what we can do on this issue of religious liberty. Let me just give you a couple of examples of some things that have happened that have concerned me and others, just some things regarding religious liberty. If you think about our students in public school, you would think that during winter time of the year, they probably would want to exchange greetings and say Merry Christmas to each other. They might even have Christmas cards. But it might surprise you that in a lot of public schools, we're seeing that happen to where those rights are being restricted. Kids are being made to feel inferior. They're being made to feel like criminals just for exchanging such a phrase as Merry Christmas. We're seeing when the certain day comes around in Valentine's Day in February, kids want to exchange cards. We're seeing kids targeted on those days as well because I guess St. Valentine's has a religious connection that some people are uncomfortable with. We've even had children tell us that they're not allowed to say the word G-O-D in schools. Pastors wanting to have events where they evoke the name Jesus, wanting to start meetings with the name Jesus or some type of religious faith, and they're being challenged. That's happening in Texas. It's not just in California or New York or another state. It's happening in our own state. We're seeing this happen. So we've been involved in doing things to push back against that or to make it clear where does the law stand on these issues. Because I think that's where the confusion comes a lot of times is folks either will say they don't know the law or pretend they don't. So we'll end up in these conflicts that seem like these are battles that have been fought long before in the courthouse or the U.S., even the U.S. Supreme Court. But sometimes if you're not very specific in the law, even at the state level, even if the Supreme Court has been very clear, if you don't have statutory language or you don't have constitutional language that's very clear about where the law is and where the law stands, you'll find people looking for a loophole and trying to get out of that, even in Texas. And so we have a lot of great lawmakers that we work with, and my office is in Austin, just a couple of blocks from the Capitol. So we work with lawmakers to make sure, do our best to make sure laws are written in a way that respect what we consider Texas values and religious liberty and family values and those things, but also will help them draft legislation, and we'll just be on the lookout for things coming through that either intentionally or unintentionally are going to have a negative impact on these issues. One of the things I want to focus on, though, and as part of the handout that I put around is, what can we do on these issues of religious liberty, on issues of health care? I mean, we're seeing a lot of these things happen. We're seeing a lot of discussion. We're seeing activity. But it seems as if it's mostly from the federal level. And so the question kind of remains, is there anything for the states to do? And as a matter of fact, there is. And there's a great legacy and history of the states being involved in that. And it's gone on for a while, but I'll just more recently catch you up to date with where this issue is. In 1990, there was a Supreme Court case on religious liberty called Employment Division versus Smith. And any lawyers out there want the citation, I can give it to you later, but I'll keep it at a more general level. But very well-known case, and it really lowered the standard as far as religious liberty protection. And so before that, the standard that existed was what a lot is commonly called a strict scrutiny standard, really the highest constitutional standard that could exist under our federal Constitution. And so when that decision came down in 1990 and lowered that standard, people were, as you could imagine, very concerned. Where would that leave us? So in 1993, Congress enacted the Religious Freedom Restoration Act at a federal level. Well, a couple of years after that, court case came along, actually from the state of Texas, City of Bernie versus Flores, dealing with actually a Catholic property in the city of Bernie. And the Supreme Court said that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act was unconstitutional at a federal level as it applied to the states. All right, so then where did that leave the states? So, good Texans as we are, we went into action, and we, as well as a lot of other states, started adopting this constitutional standard, this legal standard at the state level. And it's commonly called RFRA, or the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, at the state level as well. So in 1999, Texas adopted a statute, and it was bipartisan support. And we have a handout, a letter and another handout that references, now we've got 31 different states across the country that either have a state statutory language that is similar to what Texas has as a Religious Freedom Restoration Act, or they have something in a court case or in their constitution that makes it very clear this is the standard when the government at the state level or at a lower level takes certain action. And let me pull it back for just a second, and Jeff may have touched on some of this, my colleague Jeff Mateer, but if he didn't, let me bring this back to you on the federal and state level. So you have the federal Constitution as it's interpreted, the First Amendment, and it talks about what your religious liberty protections are. But because of that and the principles there and also court cases, this really acts as a floor, and it's a pretty high floor, make no mistake about it, but the states have the ability to have a stronger level of religious liberty protection. So in that case I was talking about, the Supreme Court said this federal version of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act could not be applied to the states. That was an act of Congress. But then the states could come around and say, well, then we'll enact one at the state level. So if there's some type of state action or local government action at a lower level that infringes upon people's religious rights, we've got that strong protection as well. And wouldn't you know, we see that happening. Some of those examples I mentioned to you are local government acting. The public school issues with the kids, making references to Merry Christmas or a candy cane or saying the words G-O-D, all these different things that have been happening to them, that's local government. That's not the federal government. That's a public school district. That's a county. I live in Hayes County. We were involved in an issue recently where groups were coming in from other parts of the country and then trying to mislead elected officials on what the law was and get them to change their policies and restrict people's religious liberty rights. So there's a lot of things that we have done and we can continue to do at the state level. And so this handout I have, and I'll just dive right into this. One of the main things that's going on this state legislative session, and don't let me jump forward too much. Most of y'all are probably aware right now the Texas Legislature is in session, right? Most of us are aware of that. Started in January, ends in May, 140 days if they're lucky. There's not a special session. So that's every 2 years. That's going on right now. We have an opportunity in the state of Texas to see what's happening and see what could be happening moving forward and really make a significant difference on the issue of religious liberty. And not only a difference, but really a permanent difference in what happens and what our Constitution says and what religious liberty looks like. So we can see what's happening at the federal level and know that we're not immune from that in our state, but there's something we can do about it. So what a lot of states are looking at is saying, you know what? We are glad that we took this step in the late 90s and early 2000s to put something in statutory language saying, here's the highest level of religious liberty protection that we should have, and here's the standard that courts should use when an individual or religious organization is challenged or they have the government infringing upon their religious rights. But a lot of states are saying, you know what? We're concerned that moving forward that the judges are going to interpret it in a way that somehow does not allow religious liberty to prevail. We want it in our Constitution. We want it permanent, or if you will, to such a high level that it's hard for a runaway judge or some legislature to come around later and to change that standard. Because oftentimes you'll see this argued. You'll have a statute that is adopted and passed, and another law will be passed later in time. And someone will argue there's a conflict in the law. We should defer to the law that was passed most recently. So that could negate whatever statutory protection we have. And I think it's only obvious we're going to continue to see more pressure and more direct attacks on religious liberty, particularly from things within our state. And here's another reason why I think we're seeing it. There are a lot of folks that they like the direction that things are going at the federal level. They don't want folks to have as much religious liberty protection. They don't want some of these conscience protections. They like some of the overreach, in my opinion, of some of these healthcare provisions. They think that's the right way to do it. But they know at the state level in Texas, it's going to be hard for them to get that done. So they know they solely rely upon however far the federal government can reach. But they'd like to implement that at the state level. Make no mistake about it. But they're going to have some trouble doing that. So instead, they're going to the local level. They're going at the city level, at the county level. Travis County, Bexar County, Harris County. A lot of these counties already have measures in place that challenge our own state constitution on the definition of marriage. And we're involved in legislation that's going to help push that back or penalize entities that do that disrespect our state constitution. But so that's where we're seeing the strategy from folks that disagree with us on how strong religious liberty protection should be, is they're going at the local level. So the way that we can have an impact on that in a positive way is to say, you still have to answer to the Texas Constitution. So I've got a couple handouts that are floating around where we have language that has been taken from the very best part of this Religious Freedom Restoration Act language. And one of the handouts has a letter that was drafted for North Dakota who approved this and put this to their voters. The voters were not able to pass this disappointing issue out there, but I think some of it was a matter of strategy, and they were surprised by some of the people that came out and put money into this campaign. There's a lot that's been learned from that experience, and my pledge to you is that if we have an opportunity to put on the ballot a constitutional amendment that gives Texas the highest level of religious liberty protection that we can have at the state level, that Texans will come through. And I'm going to do everything I can to make that happen. The way to do that, though, is we have to go through the legislative process. So we have language, and the reason I have this letter circulated is because I want you to see the level of constitutional scholars on this letter from Harvard Law School, University of Virginia, Stanford, Princeton, University of St. Thomas School of Law, Notre Dame, just some great individuals. Not to say that the University of Houston Law Center is not a great law school, because I believe it is. And maybe I can get somebody's name on there from their faculty as well. But just so you know the level of expertise of folks that are supporting this type of language and this effort. And it's not just happening in Texas, it's happening across the country. And so what we have done is recognize that it's not good enough to say, you know what, this is Texas, and we've got great statutory language. There's another way that we can ensure at a state level that we have strong protection and permanent, if you will, protection. So if just for folks that may not know all part of the process, let me explain to you on the constitutional amendment side why that is different and why that has so much more meaning to it. What happens is you have a piece of legislation that goes through the legislative process at the state level. It has to get 2/3 support. So that's in the House and in the Senate. Your normal bills just need a simple majority. It's very challenging, no matter what the issue is, to get 2/3 support, particularly in the House. They do it quite often in the Senate. It's part of just kind of their normal rules. But in the House, it's definitely a lot more challenging. You have more members you have to deal with. And we already have legislation that's been filed, and it's on one of the handouts, but in case you didn't get it, it's HJR 110 in the House, State House, and SJR 4 in the Senate. The House author is Representative Jason Isaac from my home county, and also Senator Donna Campbell, also from my district I live in, on the Senate side. So these pieces of legislation that have been filed. So you need 2/3 from the House and the Senate, and you have two bills because it gives you a chance to have two vehicles. So maybe you get one going in the House, maybe you get one going in the Senate, maybe you get them going simultaneously, and you see, maybe at one point they join up, but it gives you two chances to make it work. But so what happens is you have to get 2/3. Then of course, get it signed by the governor. We have already visited with the governor and the lieutenant governor, and they have pledged their full support behind this constitutional amendment effort, as well as many other state leaders. So what happens then, you get it passed, then it goes to the ballot. But then you just need a simple majority at the ballot. But historically, you have about 12% of the people actually that are eligible to vote in a constitutional amendment election. That will happen this year. The legislature will end, if they don't take up a special session, they'll end at the end of May. And then November, there will be an election where it'll be on the ballot, and this language will be on the ballot, and that gets the people to be involved in it. So moving forward, it becomes a part of the Constitution, our state Constitution. And so if anyone ever wanted to change that standard, and in case I kind of glossed over some of that, essentially what this language is a legal standard for courts to use when the government does something to infringe upon a person or an organization's religious liberty rights. So it is not, and that's why I reference these law professors. This is language that's been used in court cases. This is language that professors have looked at, have vetted. And so it's not similar to just a piece of legislation. It actually is something we know this is the best standard to use to make sure folks have their religious liberty protection passed. That's why the language is short. You see a lot of legislation, maybe it's 2 or 3 pages long. It is 2 or 3 lines. It's very short, it's very to the point, and it gets us just about everything we believe that we need to have the level of religious liberty protection that's available and that is necessary to stop some of the things that we're seeing happen at the federal level and already in our state. And I want to jump back real quick. I was mentioning that there are some groups that are coming into our state and threatening elected officials and trying to file lawsuits. This is their way of using what's happening in other parts of the country and at the federal level to try to bully us at the state level by misleading elected officials at the lower levels who may not be aware of the law. They don't have this type of expertise. And so they will misstate or mislead people about what the law really says. Oh, well, this circuit over here said this, or this court over here said this, or, we think the Supreme Court said this. And so they're using what's happening across the country and at the federal level to try to impact Texas. And because those are things made at the local level or at the state level, if we have this type of religious liberty protection in our Constitution, that's the final authority. And so moving forward, if anyone ever wanted to change that, they could not simply pass a statute afterwards and say, oh, there's a conflict. They would actually have to have legislation go through the legislature to repeal the constitutional amendment. You think it's hard to pass a constitutional amendment? It's probably even that much harder to try to repeal something that went through the legislative process, that was vetted by lawyers and staff and all sorts of people, that went to the ballot. And that's what makes this even more significant. It's even more so much an expression of what the people want, and not 1 or 2 people in some other position, whether they're elected or not, dictating what they think the Constitution says and when they think the limits are to religious liberty. And so that's why I am very passionate and excited about the opportunity we have at the state level to have this type of meaningful religious liberty protection. And we think about some of the issues that you're going to talk about in this conference. They affect, I'm going to suggest, in my experience, all of them. All of them when it comes, because so many things are coming back to what our religious liberty rights are, what is an exercise of our religion, what we see as a part of our practice of our religious faith, acting it out. So many of those things that you're discussing tie back to this. And if this type of protection is in place, I believe this is our strongest defense and strongest offense as well to see what's coming. And the other reason that a lot of states are looking at this, they're also looking at the climate. And they're recognizing that the time is now to do something and to put forth this type of effort, because you may see things continue to erode, particularly even in Texas. I mean, it's difficult to get a constitutional amendment passed. I'm going to be, frank with you, even in today's climate. Even though you could say, well, there are this many people in this party or that believe this way, still hard to get those 100 votes. You got to have everybody on the floor. You have to have, it has to be a very, a lot of things have to come together, but it's definitely possible and it's within our reach. And so we see an opportunity to do that, and that will, if nothing less, send the message that in the state of Texas, we have a right, we have an ability, and we have that freedom to make an expression of what we believe religious liberty rights look like. Alabama's already doing this. You'll see other states that'll take it to that next level too. That'll say, you know what? This is an answer to a lot of our problems, is having this permanency in the Constitution. We want to go to that next step as well. So there's a couple of court cases. It was one other bill I want to mention to y'all that's making its way through the legislative process that I think is very significant, but it's taken a different approach, and it's something that's being used a lot, and you'll see this at state level. So I want y'all to think about this and also discuss it with others. The ability that the state has when it comes to economic and fiscal issues. So if we see something happening that we disagree with, we use the power of the purse, so to speak, either to support something or to take away something. We're seeing that happen right now because we're seeing some school districts that are violating our state constitution on the issue of the definition of marriage. So in order to send the message to them that they can't violate the state constitution, there's a legislation that forces them to provide their own health care on their own dime instead of from the state government. But the main piece of legislation I want to tell you about is House Bill 649. They're calling it the Hobby Lobby bill. Some of you are familiar with the issue with Hobby Lobby. So that leads kind of back to the question, well, what can the state do about it? And this is an issue that's coming from the federal level. Essentially, what the legislation does is put a mechanism in there to put some relief towards these type of businesses that are under this attack by the federal government on these type of healthcare issues and religious issues, issues of conscience. And so there might be a significant cost there if it actually passes. But, a lot of people are looking at it and saying, maybe this is what we need to start doing. Either supporting organizations, supporting their religious rights, supporting the values of our state by saying we're going to give them some tax relief. Since the federal government is trying to find them into ruin, into bankruptcy, why don't we step up and give them some effort or some level of tax relief to help them overcome or bear this burden so they don't go out of business? Because I think people would agree that having businesses like Hobby Lobby and other successful businesses in the state of Texas does have an impact and is significant. And there's a reason why Texas is always one of the top states for business, and because we know how to do things well at the fiscal level. So this is another thing to think about, and this is just one example of looking at the government either penalizing entities that restrict or infringe upon people's religious rights if it's coming from the private level, or the government giving relief when we see something coming from the federal level that's trying to restrict people's religious rights. And so there's some different mechanisms, and there's some creative people over there in Austin that we're working with. And so these are a couple of examples, but I think they're two of the most significant examples of where some of the movement is happening at the state level in Texas during this legislative session. And I wanted to really just highlight too, because there's a lot of bills and things going on, but there's not a lot of time between now and the end of the legislative session. And so for those of y'all that care about these issues and want to be involved and want to make a difference, and I think that's probably why many of y'all are here, you want to be informed and think, well, now what can we do about these issues? I'm looking at my calendar. We're at March the 8th. We're really just a couple 3 months really left in the legislative session. It's not a lot of time, less than 90 days. So if you want to get involved, now is the time to do that. And so, but I'm excited because I think Texas has always been a leader on so many significant issues and has had the creativity and the leadership to do something. And so I'm excited there's an opportunity to do something at the state level as well as some of the things that were happening at the federal level to push back and give us support for these issues that they're of great concern to us. And so I just want to tell you all that I didn't do a lot of introduction, but a little bit about what I do is I talked to you about working with elected officials, drafting things and so on, but our organization also tries to match people up with their elected official. So if you come to Austin, you want to call us and say, I want to go meet with Representative Jim Murphy or Representative Bohack or Senator Dan Patrick or whoever represents your district, Patricia Harless and so on, we can help you get matched up with them if you haven't already. We can give you insight on the legislative process. And we have a day that we're having at the Capitol, Faith and Family Day on March 26th, where this is going to be one of the important issues that we're going to focus on, religious liberty. And so anything that we can do, we're not just a group that is up there and myself lobbying and interacting. We're also trying to be at your level, interacting with folks, get them more connected to the process, giving them insight on the process and what's happening at the state level on other issues as well. And so I'm going to continue to do that. And, I was talking about my history growing up in Texas and being from city of Houston, and I went to Galena Park High School over in the Ship Channel. That's where I graduated. And so I even get more excited about visiting with people from the Houston area or folks that are either from here or you live here now. Give me a lot of joy to do anything I can to continue to empower you, connect you more with folks, and get you involved in what's happening right now and show you how you can make a difference right now.
Hi, I'm Jeff Gardner, and on behalf of the John Paul II Life Center and the Christus Medicus Foundation, thank you for watching this presentation. The need for more crisis pregnancy centers and Christ-centered medical practices throughout the United States is critical and ongoing, and we'd like to encourage you to get involved. Before you do, there are a couple of important takeaways that we'd like to leave you with. First and foremost, Develop a strong and clear vision of what it is you want to create. Be sure that you understand the distinctions between a crisis pregnancy center, a family practice clinic, an OB/GYN clinic, a multidisciplinary medical practice, or a sonogram center. Familiarize yourself, too, with the not-for-profit laws as they pertain to healthcare in your state. John Paul II Life Center operates within the state of Texas. Your laws may vary. Also, before you begin either to explore a crisis pregnancy center or a Christ-centered medical practice, get the blessing of your bishop. Get a committed and unified board. If you can, get the cooperation of your local Catholic hospital. Organize and identify physicians who can be key in helping you getting your project off the ground. Develop a strategic plan, and within it include the right professionals, those that you'll need to advise you in all aspects of your endeavor. Familiarize yourself with the fundamentals of fundraising, communication, and education. Everyone involved does not need to know how to do everything, but everyone involved should know about everything that needs to be done. To open a Christ-centered medical practice, understand the financial operations of a clinic. When considering the financial arrangements needed to establish a clinic, it has been our experience that the first-year costs, including salaries, is a minimum of $500,000 and can be supported by a recruitment agreement for a physician with a cooperating hospital. Also, care should be taken to consult with an appropriate practice management company to assist you in setting up the medical clinic and to get the correct assistance with licensing, credentialing for hospital privileges, and third-party contracts, as well as billing and collections with the best electronic medical records and healthcare information technology available. Right now, a national platform is under development to include a service company that will help take advantage of economies of scale so medical clinics and pro-life centers across the United States can be created. For more information, please contact us at Kimberly@jpiilifecenter.org. That's Kimberly at JPIILIFECENTER.org.